Welcome to the Hot Cage Podcast presented by CageWall.com. This is the podcast for March 11th, 2013. The subject for this week's podcast is UFC 158, St. Pierre versus Diaz, which will be live March 16th. 10 in the East, 7 in the West from the Bell Center in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. The card, once billed as the unofficial welterweight tournament, has been diminished slightly by injuries but remains solid. Despite the depth of the card, the story is the highly anticipated matchup between two of the best 170-pound fighters in the world today, and two guys who there is no love lost between, George St. Pierre and Nick Diaz. Without further ado, let's get this podcast started this week, as I do every week, by welcoming my tag team partner, TJ Craig. TJ, how you doing this week?
Man, I'm fired up this week. There's some great fights coming up on Saturday. You know what? And I just have to throw this little plug in here real quick. I'm having a little celebration. I finished one of my degrees, so I'm gonna be celebrating that and celebrating some fights. So let's do this.
All right, I'm ready to go. So let's jump right into things. To the show for UFC 158, St. Pierre and Diaz. By welcoming our guest, he is the prolific writer throughout the entire internet and co-host of the mmaoddsbreaker podcast. He's an awesome follow on Twitter at mmaadammartin. He's the future of MMA journalism. He's Adam Martin. Adam, welcome.
I appreciate that, man. That's almost made me cry a little bit. I'm just joking.
Well, I mean, I do believe that, and you are covering UFC 158 this week for Sportsnet. Is that correct?
That's correct. I will be in Montreal. I'm leaving on Wednesday morning, so I'll be there the whole week.
And before we get into this fight, I really want to talk about a piece of literature that you put into onto the web this week that really I was fascinated by. It's something that we talked about earlier in the week with Jason Cruz from MMApayout.com. So the article that you wrote was about how the UFC is kind of stacking these other, not stacking is not the word, but it's kind of rostering these other promotions with the cuts. So I want you to first just talk to our listeners about what the article was about for those that haven't read it.
Yeah, it's on mmaonline.com. You can check it out there. I also tweeted it on my Twitter at mmaadammartin. Just basically, it's, if you look at the recent cuts the UFC's made, they've made about, I think, like 30 cuts or something in the last month or so, and apparently there's going to be like 100 or so more coming, so there's going to be a lot coming. There's been a lot of good fighters that have been cut, a lot of talented fighters, and they're really stalking these other organizations. I don't know if they're kind of doing them a favor in a way, because if you look at a fighter like John Fitch, the UFC is the one who he's not a huge star, but he is a name. He is a big name, and he's going to be the main event of World Series of Fighting 3 now. So they've let him go. And then you have guys like Matt Riddle. He's going to Legacy Fighting Championships. They don't have any name fighters at all, really. I mean, their biggest name fighter, no joke, is Pete Spratt or like Dan Horbuckle. And Matt Riddle is a pretty well-known guy. He was a guy that was on The Ultimate Fighter. The UFC brought him up. He's been in the UFC for 5 or 6 years now, I believe. And he's on like a 4-fight unbeaten streak right now. He had a couple no contests there for smoking weed, but, I mean, he did win those fights. So, I mean, they let him go, and now he's going to probably do pretty well over there in Legacy. And then you also have Chris Cyborg, who went to Invicta. I don't know what else I have to say about Chris Cyborg. She's one of the best female fighters on the planet. I know she had some problems with the UFC or whatever, but they did let her go, and she's Invicta now. She's under contract with them, so they can do what they want with her. But yeah, I mean, the UFC, I understand that they have to make these roster cuts because there are a lot of guys on the roster, but they're helping these other organizations, even if they don't believe it, they are. Because like I said, a guy like John Fitch, he gets cut. Now he's the World Series of Fighting main event. They're going to make some money off their event, and they have their events on NBC Sports. So, these other organizations are taking advantage of these cuts.
Well, yeah, I'll ask you the question that I asked Jason. Does the UFC then have to strategically cut in order to not matchmake for other organizations? For example, cutting fighters from different divisions when they do cuts.
Yeah, I think they do actually. They do have to kind of be careful because, like you said, there's going to be other organizations that need fighters in certain weight classes to help fill their cards out. And if the UFC cuts them, that's bad. I mean, you look at the heavyweight division in the UFC, there's a lot of fighters in there that have bad records. Let me give you an example. Dave P.B. Herman, he's 1-3 in the UFC. He's tested positive twice for marijuana during his time in the UFC. He's on suspension right now. They sent him to rehab. Matt Riddle got cut, but Pee Wee Herman got to stay. Why? Because the UFC has like 30 heavyweights under contract, whereas they have I think 80 welterweights, maybe more than that. They wouldn't cut a guy like Dave Hearn just because of that fact. So I think you're right. I think that they're going to be cutting. If they do cut fighters, it's going to be from the weight classes where like lightweight, welterweight, where they have too many fighters, and where the other organizations, quite frankly, have too many fighters as well.
Well, that brings me up, especially talking about other organizations. There's really no mention of Bellator. So, do you think it's fighters coming out of the UFC? Are they just not used to that tournament style, or do they they just like the old-fashioned? This is what we lay in front of you, and this is how we're going to produce it, and you kind of work your way up that way.
Well, I didn't mention Bellator for a few reasons. First off, Bjorn Rudney said that they don't want to sign UFC castoffs. Now, he said that, but they have. I mean, look at a guy like Ben Saunders. He got a couple losses in the UFC. They got rid of him, and now he's one of their top fighters. So, I mean, they say that, but, the truth of the matter is if the fighters are decent enough, Bellator will take a look. But honestly, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of signings in a while. I think it's more so to do with a feud between, like, Viacom and Zuffa or something like that, and the whole contract matching thing. I think a lot of these guys don't want to, because the thing is, even though the UFC's cut these guys, they are still technically allowed to match contracts. And we know that Bellator's, I don't know if I want to swear here, I won't swear, but they've screwed with some of their fighters. I guess you could say Roger Hall, Tyson Nam wasn't in the UFC, but a guy like Roger Hall at the UFC tried to sign him, and then Bellator blocked their signing, and eventually he did go to the UFC, but obviously Eddie Alvarez is the biggest example of that. So I mean, if the UFC, or Bellator I should say, if they want to sign a guy that the UFC got rid of, like Rampage Jackson, they can try to, but UFC would probably match it just to piss them off.
Yeah, and it gets interesting because, the big thing is when you're the number 2 organization, the question becomes, well, because another guy that came from Bellator is Hector Lombard, who's not doing too hot in, the UFC. So the question becomes, if a guy goes to Bellator and just crushes, then doesn't it make the UFC look stronger? And then if a guy comes from Bellator to the UFC and does horribly, it kind of, if you're Bellator, it's kind of, if you don't even engage in any of that, there's really no comparison. So the question I want to ask you next, kind of jumping off of that, do you think that for any of these organizations, the best way for success is sort of to just embrace themselves as a minor leagues for the UFC, maybe like an NBA D league? Because I kind of feel like that's what Invicta is setting themselves up to be, like a feeder league. Do you think that any promotion should embrace that, or should they just kind of be their own entity?
I think that's smart. I think that's the way to go, because I think the UFC is always going to be the number 1. Obviously, Bellator is trying to get up there now. They are trying to compete with them. I do watch Bellator every week, but to me, there's no comparison between Bellator and the UFC. The product they have, the UFC's fighter roster is so much better than the Bellator's. I mean, there are some very talented fighters in Bellator, and I do like their tournament system. That's what kind of differentiates them. So I think they might be an exception, but I mean, leagues like Invicta, I think they're doing the smart thing right now, by, like you said, basically being a feeder system for especially for the women. I mean, Invicta has it great right now, and some of these other organizations, they should be as well. World Series of Fighting, I believe they let their guys out of contract if the UFC tries to sign them. So it's kind of like a feeder system too, in a way. I saw an article this week saying Andrei Arlovsky actually wants to go back to the UFC if he beats Anthony Rebel Johnson in a couple of weeks. So because the World Series of Fighting has said in the past that they let fighters out of their contract, don't be surprised if the headliner of their next card ends up in the UFC. So I guess in a way they are being a feeder system as well, and I agree with you. I think that's the way to go, because you cannot compete with the UFC. They'll just buy you out like they did the Strikeforce.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking, because it's better set up if a feeder system, because you're going to get more followers. Then if you start feeding into the UFC, that's just going to make your organization better. And in saying that, I have another question for you. With the organizations that you wrote about, or even if you didn't write about, which one of them do you think is best set up for long-term success?
Well, I'd say Bellator for sure. I don't know if that counts because I didn't write about it in the article. But I mean, like I said, with the backing they have from Viacom, they have billions of dollars to spend. They have a deal with Spike TV, so they're going to be big. They have the reality show coming out. They have tons of tournaments. If they continue to find talent, whether it's ex-UFC talent or if their scouting obviously in Russia has been fantastic. If they can find some more hidden gems, they're going to have some success for sure. But I think Invicta is going to be very successful. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if eventually in the future the UFC actually bought them, kind of like they did with Strikeforce, but run them as well, and maybe in the future fold them together because they do have like 4, I think, women's divisions. But I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, just because we know that Invicta and UFC actually have a very good working relationship. They've had a lot of fighters go back and forth between the promotions. So I wouldn't be shocked if that happened in the future, but I think they're going to be successful for as long as they do run their shows because they have a different show. It's all women. And I don't know if you guys have seen their events, but they're awesome. I mean, the women are – I don't know. I see a lot of people bash the women fighters on Twitter. I disagree with that completely. I think the women are just as talented as the men in many ways. And there's some incredible female athletes out there. So I think that because Victor's a little different, just because of gender difference, they can have some success for sure.
I think I agree with you in terms of the women. I'm certainly someone that's coming around because I wasn't really into women's MMA initially. I think what most people kind of get hung up on is it's just 2 girls fighting and they don't want to see girls fighting. That's their major hang-up. But realistically, women fighting is different than any other aspect of women versus men's sports because if you compare the WNBA and the NBA, well, one's an above the rim game, one's a below the rim game. Women fighters can do everything that men fighters can do. It's just a comparative thing. You knock a woman out, she's going to fall the same way a man does. If you hit her in the right spot, you can break her arm just sitting in the same arm bar. So I think, like you said, it's a comparative thing. And I think that what I see moving forward is that almost the UFC would buy Invicta and just let Invicta's kind of people they have in place just run it. Like Shannon Knapp would still run Invicta just under the UFC banner. I think that really makes the most sense. So
I agree.
All right, so let's get on to the true business at hand, which is UFC 158. George St. Pierre versus Nick Diaz. Like I said, it is coming from the Bell Center in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Now, Adam, I'm gonna propose something to you here before we get into the fights.
Okay.
Because I had a little bit of a thought today, and I kind of wanted to get a poster ready to show you, and I couldn't do it in time, but I'm gonna get one and send it to you. What bothers me about the fights now. I don't know how much it bothers me, but it's just a little thing that I kind of get caught up on is they don't name fights anymore. Okay, there's no Rumble in the Jungle. There's no Thrilla in Manila. There's none of that. Okay, so I have 2 names for this fight. I've gotten some feedback from some other people. I want to get your feedback too. Okay, here we go. And I'm even you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna introduce the fight. I'm gonna go Chael Sonnen on you for a second before we get into this, and then I'm gonna introduce the fight, and you tell me which you think is more impressive. Okay. This Saturday, from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, it is UFC 158, George St. Pierre versus Nick Diaz. Hell at the Bell, or the Brawl in Montreal.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. It's the Brawl in Montreal. That's sick, man. I you know what? I wish they'd start naming events like they used to. Like even if they're stupid ones, like UFC Knockout or whatever, UFC Hostile Territory. I like that. I think it gave it a little bit of flavor. So I think that was awesome, the one you just had, man.
All right, so the Brawl in Montreal it is. You got it from an official source. All right, so speaking of the Brawl in Montreal, I want to get talking about UFC 158, St. Pierre versus Diaz. Let's get into the main event first. Now, here's my thing that I want to start with, and then we'll get into everything because I want to talk about this I really want to get deeply into this. Okay. So I want to talk about the conference call. I want to talk about all the aspects of the fight. But my first thing is, in terms of the Brawl in Montreal, I have long had a theory that when 2 guys really hate each other, you don't get the fireworks that you expect you're going to get. You get a hell of a weigh-in, and you get a hell of a press conference, and everybody's broken up. But neither one of these guys wants to be embarrassed by the other. Now, these are 2 different fighters. But when Rampage fought Rashad, TJ and I were both there, and that was the most anticlimactic. We were there. Okay, yeah. I think it was MGM. I'm not sure if it was MGM or Mandalay. But either way, right before the fight, every single person in the building was stomping their feet. I thought the place was going to collapse. And then when, the fight started, my heart collapsed because nothing happened. I was like, I was just disappointed. So do you think the fact that these guys, there's so much animosity between these 2 guys may kind of make it a less than stellar fight or no?
It could. I mean, I can't help but think about GSP versus Josh Koscheck too. They coached the Ultimate Fighter together. they hated each other on the show. There was so much, a ton of smack talk between the two guys. And then when the fight came, it was basically George St. Pierre jabbing Josh Koscheck in the eye for 5 rounds. He didn't finish him. It wasn't a very, it was kind of entertaining, I guess, but it wasn't great. It wasn't a great fight. Kind of like you just mentioned Rashad versus Rampage. That was the first one that came to my head. That fight sucked. I didn't like it at all. It was boring. So I really hope this isn't the case. But I just think the difference between a lot of these fights is that, a guy like Rampage Jackson, his foot's been halfway out the door for years already. Nick Diaz and George St. Pierre, these guys come to war, man. I think Nick Diaz, he's going for the finish for 25 minutes. He's never stopping. He's always looking to finish the fight. Even in his last fight against Carlos Condit, I think there was like a minute left in the fight, and he went for he took Condit's back, and he went for like an armbar or something from the back. So he won't stop. And George St. Pierre, he's the king of decisions, but I guess in a way it's possible that his hatred towards St. Pierre or towards Diaz, could hinder him in this fight. But I think it might motivate him, man. I think he's going to TKO Nick Diaz actually.
Yeah, and saying that too, because this fight is getting hyped up, and I think you're absolutely right. Diaz just goes at you for 25 minutes and he doesn't stop, and GSP with his fight with Condit, I thought looked really well for being out so long. A little bit of ring rust, but he got over that and he was just an animal. But talking about up in this fight, I mean, everybody heard the conference call. It was all over Twitter. It's on YouTube, on blogs. I mean, the conference call was just fucking bananas, and I loved it. I tweeted it out right away. I was like, "This is one of the best conference calls," and I can't wait for the fight because it's just going to be fireworks everywhere. So, what were your thoughts about the conference call?
Man, I've listened to it like 10 times. It's so awesome. It's hilarious. I mean, Nick Diaz is going off for basically it's about 40 minutes long, I guess. He's just going off about every little witch thing that he had in his mind at the time. It's just absolutely ridiculous, some of the stuff he was saying. I don't know, man. I was sitting there laughing. I thought it was brilliant. I think he is trying to get in George's head, and I think it might be working a bit. You could tell by George's reaction; he was pretty pissed off. He was giggling and stuff on the conference call, which I thought was pretty hilarious too, as well. But I mean, some of the stuff Nick Diaz was saying, man. What did he say? He's like, everyone wants to get strong like George. Everyone wants to wear tight shorts like George. No one wants to jiu-jitsu. No one wants to do boxing anymore. Everyone just wants to throw a Superman punch like George. I mean, just stuff like that. I was laughing, man, and I know that everyone else was too. It was a brilliant conference call. Think about the soccer mom too. That was another really key moment. It was pretty awesome. But I mean, yeah, some of the stuff he was saying, calling GSP, he kept saying motherfucker. I'm sure that pissed GSP off. I'm sure it did. I mean, who wants to be called that, right? So, I don't know, man. We'll see if it fires GSP up or if it takes away from his performance. But I really do believe it's going to motivate him for this fight. I think he really wants to finish Nick Diaz and send a huge statement that not only is he the best welterweight, he's the best fighter in the world. So, I mean, that's the statement he wants to make.
Yeah, I agree. It was weird. When I was listening to the conference call, I thought that it was just destined to be something that, the guys on Howard Stern used to prank call people, or like I just felt like it was going to, and maybe we'll see that later on, but I just thought that it was going to just give birth to this whole thing of like Nick Diaz talking to Christian Bale, like this whole other thing of like insanity or like soundboards that were going to be all Nick Diaz. Because like you said, it was really insane. So Nick Diaz was answering questions for George. He was all over the place. And, I mean, we really kind of got a peek, and TJ and I talked about this before. Nick Diaz isn't going to give you what you want, but he's going to give you enough that if you read between the lines, dude, everything that anyone would ever want to get from a UFC primetime or a countdown show or any of that, you got in that conference call. Now, granted, you didn't get it the way you wanted it, him sitting down and answering your questions. That's everything. That shows his jealousy about not getting sponsorships. It shows that, his hatred that people aren't as pure of a martial artist as he is. I mean, it showed you everything that you need to know about Nick Diaz, that he lives in an area where people hate him because of George St. Pierre's popularity, despite Nick feeling like he's a true fighter, true martial artist. I mean, working in all these, lower organizations and having to pay his dues. Everything you wanted to see was in that 40 minutes of insanity. So there's three aspects to fighting, and we're going to get to them all, in my opinion. But kind of making the move from what we're talking about now and continuing with it, what I think the three aspects of fighting are this: the stand-up game, the ground game, and the head games. So in this fight, what do you think about Nick Diaz's ability to literally play head games with George St. Pierre? And the reason why I asked that is I wrote something for Cage Wall where I said that if George St. Pierre wants to beat Nick Diaz, he's talking about going to a dark place and doing all this other stuff. No, you need to do more of the same. You're the best 170-pound fighter in the world for a reason. If you start playing Nick Diaz's game, you're going to go down a road that, for the first time, that he drives through every day. Nick Diaz is like the mailman in the dark alley that he's trying to get GSP to go down, and I don't think he should. So what are your thoughts on the head games, and if Nick Diaz can kind of lure GSP into his world?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know what? People think that Nick Diaz is a stupid guy. They think he's crazy, but I think the guy's a lot smarter than a lot of us think. Just the stuff he said in the conference call, like you said, if you read between the lines, there was a lot to take away from that. So I don't think he's as nuts as people seem to think he is. I think he's doing a great job right now. Especially basically this fight, it seemed like it really crept up on all of us. Obviously last year or 2 years ago, I guess, when the fight was supposed to happen, there was injuries or whatever. It was a huge fight or whatever. But Nick's been on the sidelines for a long time, and GSP just fought recently, and I just feel like the fight kind of crept up. But after that, that whole call, it's really ramped up the intensity heading up into fight week, and this is the most important week of the fight as far as preparation goes. As far like the training's done, George St. Pierre's done his training camp. He's been training for 10 weeks or whatever. But like you said, there's three aspects to martial arts. He's been training the ground game and his stand-up, but he hasn't been training the head games. I mean, he's like I said, he's like I know he's mentally strong or whatever, but now he has Nick Diaz right beside him. Now he's talking to Nick Diaz on the phone. Now he's going to have Nick Diaz in his face at the press conference. It's a lot different. When your coach is telling you don't worry about it and stuff like that, we have to make sure we don't let him get into our head. And then when you're actually on stage with this guy or standing beside him, it's completely different. So I think Nick Diaz as far as the head games, he's winning that right now.
Well, yeah, and real quick, there's a big difference between being mentally strong and someone calling you a bitch in the middle of the octagon.
Absolutely.
And having to react to that.
Absolutely. No, I agree. That's the thing. His taunting, it's going to, I think, cause some problems in this fight. He does it in every fight. Carlos Condit in his last fight at UFC 143, he was able to stymie that. He was very, very aware of the fact that Diaz was going to do that to him. I'm sure George St. Pierre will. But like you said, it's different training for it. And then when you're actually in a cage with a guy and he's sticking his finger up at you and stuff like that, I mean, that'll piss off anyone. Especially a guy like George St. Pierre who's got so much pride. He's fighting in front of his hometown of Montreal, so it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I have to agree, and I want to go back a little bit because I think you're right, and you touched on something with Diaz, and he's not stupid, and I think what we saw was just a little bit of an insight what he goes through every day, and we talked about this last week, John and I. I think Nick is mentally probably one of the strongest people in the UFC, and I say that because he does triathlons. He does a lot of work like that. And he does triathlons like most people eat candy. He's always biking. He's always running. He's always swimming. And it takes a little bit of a mental toughness to do that many and to keep strong. And then he busts out with the conference. And I think it's just a little insight for everybody to see what's going on in his mind day to day. So, yeah, he acts a little crazy, but the kid's all over the place. And I think might be a little unstable, but I think his maturity and his mental game is just high level. Now moving on, with the stand-up game, we know Diaz is a great boxer. We know GSP has worked with Freddie Roach in the past. So these stand-up games, what are you thinking about the boxing matchup here?
It's a really interesting one, actually. I was talking to my boxing coach today at the gym, and he said that he thinks George is going to show his boxing skills off in this fight. I'm a little surprised. I think that the reach disadvantage is going to cause some problems for it, but he is an excellent striker. He's a very underrated striker. We saw what he did to Josh Koscheck, kept busting his eye open. Like you said, he worked with Freddie Roach. His jab is phenomenal. Against Carlos Condit, he threw some beautiful, beautiful combinations. And Carlos Condit, that guy's an amazing striker too. So I think that, like I said, the reach is going to cause some problems, and I don't really see GSP standing too much. But I think if the fight does stay standing, he'll hold his own to stand up. And the thing with GSP is I think he throws more kicks than Nick Diaz as well. Nick, like you said, is primarily a boxer. He throws his hands. He throws a very, very high volume of punches. He actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he averages the most significant strikes per per minute in the UFC. I think he throws over 6 significant strikes per minute, compared to like George. I think he throws 3. So if he can keep throwing those combinations, it's gonna be they can add up. But obviously we're going to talk about the ground game, I guess, next, because I think that the key to this fight is definitely George St. Pierre's takedowns.
Well, before we get to the ground game, I kind of do want to ask you something, because another theory I've long had is that sometimes when you're a great wrestler, if you play your cards right, you can use your wrestling to kind of open up your striking in terms of, the striking game. I mean, it's a matter of inches as to whether or not a jab gets through or a hook gets through. So if I'm a solid wrestler and I got your hands a little bit lower, worrying about my takedowns, then that's going to open up the jab. It's going to open up other things. So do you think that it's in St. Pierre's best interest to strike early and then take down, or vice versa?
Absolutely, no, that's exactly. It's the same thing. Obviously, this is a different matchup, but the Glover Teixeira James DeHuna fight that was announced today, I think that's the same thing. I think Glover's going to use his striking to set the takedowns and hurt James on the ground. I think it's just these are smart fighters. George St. Pierre is a very smart fighter. He'll know, like you said, if he throws his hands at Diaz's head, but he mixes in the wrestling takedowns, Diaz is going to drop his hands a bit. It's going to open up the strikes to his head. So yeah, I do think that's going to happen. Yeah.
All right, so let's get hold on before we even go any further. You know me and my ADD. So Glover Teixeira is fighting James DeHuna, because that's news to me. So I guess what bothers me even more about that is, can I get Glover Teixeira and Vanderlei Silva at 205 pounds?
Oh,
I would love that fight.
Oh my God, that'd be amazing. I didn't even think about that. That's a tough fight for Fond, but man, I'd love to see it. That'd be a bang fest right there.
I'm here to tell you, I wrote a whole piece on Cage Wall about that. I think Vanderlei should stay at 205 pounds, because I would love to watch him fight those 205 pounders. I got no interest in 85 for him, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, let's get back to business. Okay, so the ground game, obviously we know that Diaz is, I guess skill for skill, you would say he's a better jiu-jitsu practitioner than GSP is, in terms of if they were straight grappling, but GSP's ability to pass guards and pass, and get to side control and all that stuff, does that kind of while Diaz is better at getting submissions, is St. Pierre better at avoiding them?
I think so. I think so. St. Pierre very well could be on top of Nick Diaz for 25 minutes in this fight, and Nick Diaz is a BJJ black belt under Cesar Gracie. He's incredible off his back. We saw in Pride, he submitted Takadori going with the Gogo Plata, so he's extremely, extremely creative off his back. Throws up triangles, throws up arm bars. But George St. Pierre, the guy's top control and submission defense is phenomenal. He's been submitted once in his whole career against Matt Hughes. 1 second more on that clock, and they would have went to the end of the first round in that fight. And that's it. I mean, really, I don't remember being in submission trouble in any other fight. I could be mistaken about that, but I can't remember it. But obviously Nick is dangerous, man. But I mean, George St. Pierre's fought black belts before. He has. And like you said, his ability to pass guard and to gain dominant positions on the ground, just because he's so heavy and so big and strong, it's going to be a key factor in this fight. I've been thinking a lot about this one. I think this, obviously, most people will think that because Diaz is so tough and George St. Pierre always goes to decision, this fight will go to decision. But like I mentioned earlier, I do think that George St. Pierre can get the dominant position. He can get side control. He might be able to get the mount. And he can just start raining down the blows and finish Diaz that way. I think late in the fight, after Diaz accumulates some damage, maybe in the 4th or 5th round, it could be by cuts. Diaz has been stopped by cuts before. I know he's had the surgery to remove the scar tissue around his face, but I mean, he is a cutter. He bleeds a lot in his fights, so that's how I see this fight playing out, man. I guess I kind of got into the prediction of the fight a little bit early here, but I do think that the ground game is going to be key to this fight for George St. Pierre.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you on that, because with a wrestler with his magnitude, he knows how to use the weight, and I think that's what's going to be an issue with Diaz, is because when George gets down there and starts positioning his weight in different places, he's not going to be able to get that submission. And that's one good thing about what most great wrestlers carry with them, is how to position their weight so they don't get submitted like that. And saying that, I'm gonna have to say this, and I apologize to you.
No problem.
But I'm pulling for Diaz on this one.
Okay.
And I've been saying this for the last week. Once that conference call hit me, I couldn't help but I've always liked him as a fighter. I've liked both Diaz's, and but when I got inside of his head, I don't know what it is about this kid right here, but I like that kind of that image, that truth, and I'm here to stay. I'm fucking out there, but I'll tell you the truth. I speak the truth. I walk the truth, and that's how it's going to be. But I'm going to tell you, the most interested I am about this fight is the stand-up. If they don't go on the ground at all, that would be absolutely okay with me, because I want to honestly see who the best boxer in this fight's going to be, and how they're going to work it. And in saying that, I'm pulling for Diaz, and I honestly think he's going to take out GSP on the stand-up game with his boxing skills, and I'm going to say it's going to be a knockout. And I, too, believe it's going to be in the later rounds, because I think he'll be able to wear him down and use that reach, and I think his jab is going to be working, and then he has that incredible body shots when he's up against he has people up against the ring. So that's where I'm going. For this week, I'm going Diaz with the knockout.
Can I jump in there? Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've been thinking about this too. I think he can definitely knock George St. Pierre out. I think that Nick Diaz has extremely underrated knockout power. He knocked out Paul Daly. No one's knocked out Paul Daly before. He knocked out Robbie Lawler with one punch. No one's knocked out Robbie Lawler ever again. And you've seen the guys that he's fought. He's fought a who's who of middleweights and welterweights, light heavyweights. So, I mean, Nick Diaz has definitely got stoppage power. And, if the fight stays on the feet, I think he could finish him for sure. I think that if Diaz does win this fight, it's going to be by knockout. I don't think it'll be by submission. I think it'll be TKO.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give how I think this is going to play out, and I'm going to pose a few questions to both of you. But I agree. I think that in so much as we know that Nick Diaz could potentially knock out George St. Pierre, no one knows more than he does. So he's been touched by Carlos Condit and wobbled. He obviously was famously taken out by Matt Serra. So he knows more so than we do that this fight needs to go to the ground, needs to go to the ground quickly. I actually think differently in a sense that I think that if Diaz knocks him out, it's going to be early, because I think that he's going to, once George starts implementing his game plan, I have kind of a theory, and it flies in the face of what a lot of people think about Nick Diaz, but I believe this wholeheartedly. I think Nick Diaz is a front runner, and for all his mental toughness, I think he's a quitter. I think that when he gets taken down, all that pride bullshit starts to kick in, and he starts to make excuses, and he starts to kind of feel like, I think that's why he starts taunting guys, because he needs to get it back on his, because he's starting to quit, and he needs to find a way to get himself back motivated by getting some sort of mental dominance over a guy who's destroying him. And I think if GSP takes him down for 4 rounds and just works him, he'll be giving him the finger before the 5th and trying to figure out a way to get – I don't think that he has the same kind of mental toughness that GSP does. There's no quitting GSP. And there's no quitting Nick Diaz when he's running marathons. But you put him on his ass a bunch of times, he starts to get frustrated. He starts to think, and all the things go through his head that he's getting embarrassed. He's losing respect. Nick Diaz puts too much stock into respect and embarrassment for me to think that he's not an unmentally tough kind of front runner kind of guy. So with that being said, A, Adam, I want to get your thoughts on that. And B, should he win, is the UFC ready for Nick Diaz as a champion?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I'll answer your first question, and I agree with that, actually, what you were saying. Even in the Carlos Condit fight, I know the first 2 rounds were close in that fight, and people have debated about those rounds forever, and they will debate. But I mean, Nick Diaz got frustrated because Condit was hitting him and running, and you start seeing him stick the finger up. Come on, man, come on. It gets exciting, but he definitely gets rattled. And you're right. Maybe he's a guy that just is his own worst enemy in many ways. I mean, he just battles himself in his head so much during fights that it definitely harms him. I say that, but even though he's coming off, besides the Condit loss, an incredible winning streak. But I don't know if quitter. I think that maybe he's a little too harsh. When I think of the term quitter, I think of a guy that kind of turtles up and takes strikes and taps the punches, like a guy like Bob Sapp or something like that. Well, I guess that's even a whole other story. But I know what you're saying about maybe he needs to like amp himself up and stuff like that, because he's battling his own demons. But yeah, as far as if he does pull off the upside here, like TJ's predicting, I don't know what to say, man. I think it'd be crazy if Nick Diaz was a champion in the UFC. Right now they have George St. Pierre as their welterweight champion. George St. Pierre is a huge sports icon in Canada, in North America, really around the world. I mean, he's a global icon, I think, at this point. He's the Gatorade deal, Under Armour, I think Reebok too. I mean, the guy's everywhere. He's on posters, whatever. Nick Diaz is this bad boy from Stockton who smokes pot, who swears. I mean, it's a huge contrast. And if he pulls off the shock upset, man, I don't know what to say. I really don't say. I think it'd be super interesting. I think a lot of people are finally starting to think like about this possible scenario, and I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out. I guess it'll be interesting.
Well, yeah, and TJ and I were talking about this, and I'll let TJ touch on this as well. Maybe Mark, listen, no one hates the wrestling MMA crossover more than me. I don't know why. I think wrestling's fake, and there's obvious crossover with fans and the like. I liked wrestling when I was a kid. I don't like MMA getting clouded by the is it fake, is it real, all that stuff that went on in Pride. I just don't like that stuff. So I try and avoid it at all costs. But with that being said, I think that there would be a market for Nick Diaz as a champ in the way that, Stone Cold Steve Austin or some of those people were marketed as like a, go tell your boss to fuck himself kind of there's a market for that, but I don't know those guys that you're getting from Nick Diaz, they don't go out and buy Under Armour shirts. They don't go out and buy Gatorade, like, again, Nick Diaz doesn't have the soccer moms, and that the UFC wants the soccer moms. Colin Cowherd once famously said, he goes, when you're a super fanatic and you're writing in to me and you're calling and, you're like the 20% super fan, the leagues don't care about you because they have you. You're going to be there no matter what. You know what I mean? So they're looking to branch out. They need somebody that's going to get a mom to watch MMA and then take her kid to go to MMA class. And, that's what they're going for, because the diehards, me, you, and TJ are going to watch this sport until the day we die, no matter what happens. That's just, we're diehards. They don't market to us, and they shouldn't because they have us.
Yeah,
so,
you're right.
TJ, what are your thoughts on that?
When we were talking about this, I think it would be a good crossover, and it would be kind of a bad boy image, like your Stone Cold Steve Austin in wrestling. And you're right, I don't like to compare the crossover at all, but I think it brings in a different aspect and a different diverse of people that actually could bring in an MMA. And I don't know if that's going to be good or bad, because it could address two types of people. It could address, your average blue collar type of people, your average Joe that's on the street, and they're hearing about this. They're from the California, they're from like areas like Stockton that have their champion. Like, we're a badass. We grew up hardcore, and it brings those people in. And on the flip side of that, it's do you want those kind of people coming into the organization and watching? I mean, money's money, but you don't want it to take a turn for the bad anywhere along the way. So I personally think the UFC could benefit from Diaz being champion. I think it could, if you promote him right and you reach out to him, if you kind of turn him just a little bit, he could bring that average fan into the mix and bring a new diverse culture to MMA. And he will back, MMA as a whole. I mean, he has the stand-up, the jiu-jitsu type. He's a true MMA type of guy. So, I mean, maybe that's the way they're going to reach it. But I think they could work wonders with him as being a champion.
All right, so now we've pretty much covered that to every extent that we could. So, I mean, it's a fight worthy of it. We've been waiting for it for years. Now we got it. So let's move on with the card. Next up on the card is Carlos Condit. He's fighting Johnny Hendricks. He originally had a dance partner, Rory McDonald, who has fallen out due to injury. So, Hendricks is telling anybody that'll listen that he should be fighting GSP and not Nick Diaz. But he's got a pretty game opponent in front of him, Carlos Condit. So how do you see this one happen?
It's a close fight to call, man. Honestly, it can go either. I think it's a coin flip fight. Honestly, I have a ton of respect for Carlos Condit. The way he fought GSP in that fight, he tried the whole fight for 25 minutes to win the fight, even though he was losing. He had that head kick in that third round there, and he knocked GSP down. And he went for the finish. He tried to finish him. He tried, and he was, like I said, he was there. He's still throwing up submissions from the bottom, even until the last second of the fight. So, I mean, he's a talented guy, man. He's a great striker, and he has a ton of huge wins in his career. But then you have Johnny Hendricks, and I mean, the guy's just been on a roll. He's been on an absolute roll. I was like a couple rows back when he knocked out Martin Kampmann with that punch in Montreal a couple months ago. I mean, the guy sent the guy flying across the octagon. He did the same thing to John Fitch. He has an incredible wrestling background, one of the most decorated wrestlers to compete in mixed martial arts right now. So I think the fight, it could go either way. I really don't know who I'm going to take in the fight yet, to be honest with you. So I'm leaning towards Johnny Hendricks because of the wrestling advantage. If he could mix in the takedowns, he could, with the strikes, he could win the fight. I think if the fight stays standing, even though Johnny Hendricks has that power, I think that Carlos Condit is just way too good of a striker because he uses his hands, his legs, his knees, his elbows. He uses everything. Whereas Johnny Hendricks just has that left hand, really, honestly. But it could be enough. So Sorry, I know your fans probably want me to make a prediction here, but I'm not sure yet. I have to think about this one a little bit more. I'm going to probably wait until like the weigh-ins to see how they compare on the scale or something like that to make my pick. I really don't know, man. It's a close. What do you guys think? I think it's a close fight.
Well, listen, there's probably not more of a huge Carlos Condit fan than I am. I've been watching since he was in the WEC, and I even told John when I was watching that, I said we better watch out for this guy because this is the guy that's going to move up and one day be UFC champion. Because I think he has probably one of the most dynamic, well-rounded game in all of mixed martial arts, and it's incredible. It's great to watch him fight. It's just I don't mean this to sound any other way, but it's a beautiful style of fighting that he has. I mean, it's great. And saying that, Johnny Hendricks does have some heavy hands, and that's going to be it. If he can stay away, just like he did against Diaz, I'll go ahead and make my proposition. I think Condit is going to win the fight, and I think he's going to do it the same way, pretty much how he did Diaz. He's going to stick and move. And I think he has a great enough takedown defense for Hendricks because he's going to be looking for that one-hitter quitter that he's going to keep him at bay. And that's where I think it's going to hit. He's just going to pound him and run and then work it out and probably go to a decision on that. But I'm pulling for Condit on this one.
Well, and it amounts to really what two different guys. Now, the thing I love about Carlos Condit is I think the most beautiful fight that I've ever watched, and you guys are going to think this is crazy, not from one side of it, was when Randy Couture fought Tim Sylvia. And the reason why I love that fight is because what Randy Couture did in that fight that you'd never see in MMA is MMA guys, for all their heavy hands and they have the worst head movement. MMA guys, the reason why they get knocked out, some of them, is because they lack head movement. Carlos Condit is not in that group. Carlos Condit moves very well side to side. I honestly think that Carlos Condit has good enough movement to fight, Dan Henderson at 205 and avoid that H-bomb. So, I mean, now you're looking at the opposite side, the left hand of Hendricks. I think that he has the movement, and, he mixes in the kicks well to avoid Hendricks' left hand. So if Johnny's going to fight this fight like the other fights, where he spends the entire fight just looking for the light switch to turn him out on Condit, I think it's going to be a long night for him because Condit's not going to give him that shot. Condit. Now, what everybody's saying, and Roy McDonald actually, they showed video of him on UFC Insider watching the fight. The thing about Johnny Hendricks that you really can't prepare for is that wrestling allows him to close distance very well. So that left hand is on you before you know it. So that's a problem for Carlos. But I think Carlos has the game, man, to move around. I honestly would like to see a scenario where GSP wins, Condit gets another shot at the belt. I'd like to see Nick Diaz fight Johnny Hendricks, or either one of them fight a healthy Roy McDonald. So I like the fights that kind of come more out of a Hendricks loss than out of a Hendricks win. So, unfortunately, in the business that we're in, sometimes we root for stories more than we root for fighters. And I think Carlos Condit is going to win. I like Carlos more. I just like his movement. But again, when you're a guy that can cut the lights out, man, Johnny Hendricks knows exactly where the circuit breaker is, and he can cut the lights in the whole house out when he wants to. So that Carlos needs to stay on his P's and Q's. But he was on him against Nick, and he was on him against GSP. So he just kind of got outpointed by both. So. All right, moving on to a fight that it's a fight. It's a good fight. I would rather see a couple other guys fight, but it's Nate Marquardt. It's Jake Ellenberger. When last we saw Nate Marquardt, he was getting his leg decimated by Tarek Saffiedine. So guys, tell me what you think. I'll go to you, TJ, first. Are you excited about this fight, and how do you see it going?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of excited about this fight, and I'll tell you why. Because both of these guys really need this win, and when that happens, when their backs up against the wall, that usually produces a great fight. Nate Marquardt got just demolished by leg kicks and Saffiedine in his last strike force, and he really took a beating on that, and he has to be able to grow on that, and I think he's hungry for that win. And with Jake, it's the same thing. I mean, is he getting to get back on track? He has great wrestling. He has great ground and pound. So it's going to be an interesting fight because I'm sure Nate's going to want to keep it standing up, and Jake's will want to go on the ground. So it's going to be a trial and error, kind of probably in the first round, and then the middle of the first and going into the second. That's when we're going to see these two guys really getting after it. And if I'm calling it, and if you want my pick, I think Ellenberger is going to be able to get the win. I think with his takedowns, his ground and pound, I think he's going to try and do that quickly. and take Nate's stand-up game out of underneath him, and he'll take him down and get the ground and pound and probably TKO him.
All right, what do you think?
It's another tough fight to call, man. I said it with the last one. This one is tough too. I think it's kind of a fight that's really fallen underneath the radar. It's actually a great fight. Nate Marquardt, former Strikeforce welterweight champion, former UFC middleweight title challenger. Jake Ellenberger, who was a guy that was climbing up the ladder really quick, and he got knocked up by Martin Kampmann. He fell off a bit, but I mean, this is like TJ said, this is a huge fight for both guys because they haven't looked that great lately, and they really do need a win here. So I don't know, man. I think the fight could play out in so many different ways. Honestly, I could see either guy finishing it. I could see it going to decision, either guy winning that way. I don't really see a submission in this fight. It's a tough one to pick, man. You put me on the spot here. I'm probably going to go with Nate Marquardt, though. I just feel that at 170, I think he's a beast, man. I know he's getting older and stuff, and I know that he did get his leg taken out by Tarek Safdie, but other than that leg kick, he was doing pretty well in that fight. Jake Ellenberger doesn't have that leg kick, so he's just going to be looking for that big bomb. He might be looking for the takedown, too, and to unload his ground and pound. He does have vicious ground and pound for sure, but I'm not sure, man. Actually, I think Nate Marquardt at some point during the fight is going to be able to catch Ellenberger and knock him out. Ellenberger, it's hard. I don't want to say he's a bad chin, but the fight against Kampmann, the knees that he took, the way he reacted to them, he fell down, and people thought it was an early stoppage. I've watched that fight, replay of that stoppage so many times. You can actually see Jake turtle up and go like this and say no more, because I don't know, man. I guess Kampmann either hit him on the sweet spot or he doesn't react well to taking those big bombs because he's not used to it. Because in most of his fights, he's the guy throwing the bombs. So if Nate Marquardt can land that perfect shot in the chin, he can knock him out. And I guess I'll go on a limb here and say that Marquardt's going to finish Jake Ellenberger sometime, probably the second round.
Yeah, I think that Marquardt's kind of a jump in competition for Ellenberger. I mean, he's been in there with some guys. He was in there with Shields, took the win. So, I mean, he's been in there with some guys. But I think that Marquardt's a very well-rounded fighter. I kind of wrote him off a couple years ago. He kind of went to Strikeforce and reinvented himself. So good for him. I think that what he brings to the table, I don't know if Jake Ellenberger's ready for. I think that when Ellenberger fought Shields, who was a high-level guy as well, Strikeforce champion, a lot of people forget Jake Shields beat Dan Henderson. I think that, I just think that styles make fights, and I think that Marquardt is stylistically not a good matchup for Ellenberger. I think, like you said, the things that Ellenberger does, and that's why we kind of keep an eye on when guys jump in classes. Like you said, Ellenberger goes through a majority of his career being the guy that dishes out the punishment. What happens when you're the guy that receives it? That's why there's gatekeepers. That's why there's guys that kind of can push you a little bit, but yet not be guys that are finishers, and they have holes in their game. That's why there's steps to the ladder. And like you said, if a guy like Ellenberger reacts that way to Martin Kampmann, Marquardt is in my opinion, he's a more solid guy than Kampmann is. I mean, Kampmann's got some skills, but I think that all around, Marquardt's been around. He knows how to get himself out of bad situations. He knows how to kind of, when it's not his night, he can still get a W. That's kind of what I see from Marquardt. And so much as I'm ready to just be done with Nate Marquardt, something about him bothers me. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. I'm just ready for us to move on to another guy. I was glad when Safdie won. I was like, oh, here's a new guy. He'll take Nate Marquardt's place in the public's mind. And I was cool with that. I think that Marquardt has too much for Ellenberger here, and I think that he's probably going to take it as well. All right, so moving on. The fights get a little thinner, obviously, as you move down the card. So next we got Chris Camozzi versus Nick Ring. Nick Ring, he's only got one blemish on his record, so I'll go to you, Adam, first. Do you like this fight, and what do you see for it?
It's a pretty competitive fight. Both guys pretty scrappy. It's probably going to go to decision. I think both guys don't really have the finishing instinct. I'm going to go with Nick Ring in this fight by decision. He always gets his decision, especially in Canada. I mean, fight with Court McGee. A lot of people thought that McGee should have won that fight. The fight with Ricky Fukuda a couple years ago in Australia, Nick Ring should not have won that fight, but the judges gave it to him. They seem to really like his style. I think in a close fight he's going to win it. So, especially in Quebec, where we've known that the judging has been a little bit biased towards Canadian fighters in the past couple of years. So, I'm going to go with Nick Ring here by decision. I think he's going to mix in enough strikes and enough takedowns to get the win.
DJ?
Yeah, I'll totally agree with Adam. Exactly what he said. He's just going to go to decision. He's just going to outpoint him. And with Chris Camozzi, I can't go with any guy that's been beat by Jesse Taylor. So back in the day, so I just can't do that. No, but really, Nick is going to outpoint him. I think his striking is phenomenal. I mean, I think he has great knockout power. He does it, but he has enough that he can outpoint you, and he can outstrike you. So I think that's exactly what it's going to be.
Let me just jump in there for a second. No, I agree. Nick Ring, he was he could have won that Ultimate Fighter season he was on. He got injured in the show. He actually ended up beating Court McGee, so technically, I guess linearly, he is the Ultimate Fighter champion that season. Chris Camozzi didn't do too well. He got choked out by Kyle Noken at the finale. Actually, UFC 127. Yep. He's got some submission defense problems. Chris Camozzi, I do respect the guy. He's tough. He is definitely tough. His fight with Nick Catone, he was losing the whole fight, and then ends up catching Catone with a knee, cuts him open. Wins a doctor stoppage in the third round of that fight. So he's definitely a tough guy. But honestly, I don't see all the hype behind him, to be completely honest. I saw someone ranked, someone on the UFC.com rankings. I know they're a joke, but one of these voters actually ranked Chris Camozzi number 7 in the world in the middleweight division, higher than Vitor Belfort and Yushin Okami. We'll talk about the betting lines in a sec. But I mean, if you look at the betting lines, the public seems to be all over Chris Camozzi too. I just don't see it. I think Nick Ring is an excellent fighter. Like TJ said, very, very good striker. Technically sound. He's going to win this fight.
Yep.
Yeah, and you think that they're releasing to the public the guys that vote on the UFC rankings. So I think that if you put a guy like Camozzi that high, that's grounds for immediate retraction of your voting rights. You should just be taken right off right out of it. Okay, up next we got Colin Fletcher against Mike Ricci. Mike Ricci is one half of what I like to refer to as the Canadian psychos, because him and Rory McDonald they favor the side part. They dress nice, and they remind me of Christian Bale. So, but they're both very, very game fighters. Ricci lost his last fight, which was the finale of the Ultimate Fighter, to Colton Smith. So I'll go to you, Adam, first, because Ricci's Canadian. What do you think about him bouncing back? He trains with Rory, TriStar guy. What do you think about his chances of bouncing back after the Colton Smith loss?
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting fight. I have no idea why it's the opening fight in the pay-per-view card. There's no reason why it should be. Two guys coming off losses, two guys coming off pretty, one-sided losses. There's no reason why it should be the opening fight. But anyways, as far as I see how the matchup plays out, I was impressed by both guys on the Ultimate Fighter. Mike Ricci, obviously in tough 16, he was excellent in the house. He ended up losing in the final to Colton Smith. It showed that he has some weakness in his grappling, but also the fact that he was too small for 170. Now he's back at 155. And Colin Fletcher, I was very impressed with him on tough smashes. He's very, very big for the weight class. I think he's like 6'3", if I'm not mistaken. Has like an 81-inch reach, something crazy like that. They call him the Freak Show for a reason. The guy's he's just a long, lanky guy. Very, very awkward. Very good submissions. But he didn't look that good in the final. He showed a lot of grappling problems in his own right. The biggest thing I see with Colin Fletcher is he keeps his head up way too straight. And Mike Ricci has knuckle power for sure. So I think Mike Ricci's going to find his chin and knock him out. And I think that's why the UFC wanted to make this fight as a pay-per-view opener, because I do believe we're going to have a big knockout to open the card.
And before I go to TJ, I kind of want to get your thoughts real quick on, do you think that kind of on the heels of being a training partner of GSP and Rory McDonald, on some level they see Mike Ricci as the next guy, and they're sort of giving him a push here?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, but personally, I just think coming off that loss against Colton Smith, it was just so one-sided. He literally, Colton Smith lied on his back like a koala bear for 3 rounds, just like the John Fitch and Damian Maia fight. Just lied there holding him, and he didn't do much. He had that one little thing at the end of the third round where I believe he caught him in an armbar or a triangle or something like that, and nearly finished the fight, but ended up, like I said, losing a pretty clear-cut decision. But that's a good point. I mean, like you said, Rory McDonald, GSP, they're at the golden boys of the UFC right now, and I guess they do see something like Ricci where he's kind of marketable, just because he does have that dark personality, I guess, that these other guys at TriStar seem to have.
TJ, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know what? I was exactly going to say that. I think they're going to push him for this one. because Fletcher is a freak show. I mean, he's tall, he has a long reach, but he has a chin that where he can be knocked out. And Richie dropping down to 155, I think, is the best thing for him. I think that's where he's the strongest at and the most powerful. And I think he's going to win most due by a knockout. I think they're amping this one up. It's probably going to be, like Adam said, the first fight on the card is exactly for that. You're going to get because both of these guys are going to go in. Fletcher is a brawler. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's a freak show, and he's a brawler. He'll get in there with you. So to start off the card in Montreal, who better have than, Richie that's Canadian, that can finish a fight, and that's what I think they're hoping to do, and I think that's exactly what he'll do.
Yeah, I think Richie's going to bounce back nice. I think that he sort of sees himself as what the UFC sees him as. He doesn't want to be the guy that's he doesn't want to spend the rest of his career being Rory McDonald's cornerman. Go, hey, who's that guy again? What was his name? He was on The Ultimate Fighter. He doesn't want that to be his future. So I think that he's really a sharp guy. Maybe, his ego's there. Maybe it gets, his ego kind of outweighs his talent sometimes. But when he gets them both in check, I think he's ready to go. And this may be the case. Now, there's been some stuff on the internet about him fighting in front of home fans. Do you think that'll have any effect on him, Adam?
I don't know, man. I'm not sure how he's gonna react to it. He's fought in Montreal before, a couple times actually. I can't remember what his record is in those fights. He might be like 1-1 or something, maybe 2-1. But I don't know, man. Some guys it helps them fighting in front of their hometown. Some guys it's too much pressure. And Mike Ricci, he's admitted it. He has some mental issues. I mean, he took a year off from fighting because he couldn't find himself. So if he puts more pressure on himself because he's like, oh man, my girlfriend's here, my mom's here, my dad's here, my friends and family are here, everything, he could lose the fight for sure. So I think that he's got to stay mentally strong in this one, and hopefully he's been training or talking to GSP about that, and the fact that he is opening the main pay-per-view card, because that's a lot of pressure on a young guy.
Yeah, believe me, we went to the last WEC card that was here, and literally every guy that fights in Glendale or Tempe, Arizona, lost on that card, pretty much. All the local guys Jamie Varner got annihilated, and Ben Henderson got Showtime kicked. So it was like those guys were so busy getting tickets ready for everybody and, finding places for their family to stay, they forgot to keep their goddamn hands up. So, all right, let's go move on. I just want to kind of talk about the preliminary card as a whole, and I'll go to you first, TJ. Do you see anything on the card that sticks out to you that maybe either has the possibility to get some guys some bonus money, or what's sticking out to you on the preliminary card, TJ?
Actually, on the preliminary, I'm probably going to go with Patrick Cote, and the reason I say that is he's in Canada, and his last stoppage was pretty much from illegal strikes. And on before that, I mean, he lost the decision to Kung Lee, but before that, I mean, he was on a pretty damn good run, winning fights. And I think him being in front of the home crowd, and he's on the undercard, that might put some fire under his ass, and we might see a Cote with a knockout of the night. So that's what I'm interested in seeing, was that Cote fight.
Yeah, and that's a great point you bring up too, because he didn't stumble into that Cote or to that Kung Lee fight. He earned it, and he was really on a good run. And you started to say, "Wait a second, can we take this guy seriously in this division?" And then Kung Lee kind of put a little stop to that. But Patrick Cote is this guy who kind of like ebbs and flows. Patrick Cote to me is one of those guys that I always thought that once he quits fighting, he's going to write a hell of a book, because he's been in interesting fights, he's been around, and it's like he fought this guy, fought Tito. It's like, he got the kind of career that makes for some great stories for your grandkids, but I don't know if it's the career that you would want to have. So my question to you, Adam, is the same. When you look at the prelim card, is there any bonus money in them there hills, or what are we looking at?
Yeah, for sure. Just let me touch on that Patrick Cote fight for a second here. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting fight for sure. I'm looking forward to seeing how he looks at 170 pounds. It's the first time in his career he's dropped to welterweight. So I actually rewatched the fight with Lesiev's card the other day, and he definitely looked like he was carrying some extra fat around his belly. So I think that this could be a good move for him. But honestly, I watched that fight again, and I think the zip on his punches is gone, guys. I do. It's just, I don't know, man. He's getting up there, and he's not that old. He's like early 30s, but he's just been in so many fights now against, like you said, John, I mean, Tito Ortiz when he was like 20 years old or something crazy like that, and he fought Anderson Silva. I mean, the guy's fought everyone really in the UFC middleweight division and, you know, a bunch of light heavyweights too. So I think that, you know, people are going to think that he's probably going to win that fight, but I do not be surprised if Bobby Volker pulls out that victory. You know, that's one of the fights I've kind of marked down as a possible upset, just because I do think Patrick Cote is on a very serious decline here. And like I said, I know he went on that little run there for a while, but you know, in the UFC he hasn't looked that great. But anyways, as far as what fights I'm concerned, looking forward to, the one guy I'm really looking forward to seeing is making his UFC debut is Jordan Meehan. He was in Strikeforce for a little while. He's fought all over Canada. I've seen him fight in person a bunch of times. The guy is an absolute monster, guys. He's 23 years old. I believe he's 26-8 in his career. He's been fighting since he was 16 years old. Actually, his very first fight came against Rory McDonald back when they were both, I think, 16, which is absolutely insane. Rory obviously is, you know, top 5 in the world now, but Jordan's coming up there, man. He is climbing. If you look at his win streak, he beat guys like Josh Berkman, Joe Riggs, Cyborg Santos, Tyler Stinson. He lost to Tyrone Woodley, but it was a split decision. He was actually doing a lot off his back in that fight. He was throwing a bunch of elbows. That one of the judges actually ended up scoring the fight for him, even though he was taken down every round just because he was so active off his back. But the fight that really stood out to me, I was in Hamilton, Ontario a couple of months ago. He fought Forrest Petz, who is a UFC veteran. Forrest Petz, very, very tough guy. Jordan Meehan walked across the cage and absolutely steamrolled him with one of the most brutal like series of combination of elbows and punches I've ever seen in the cage. Knee, elbows. His Muay Thai looks insane. So he's fighting Dan Miller, who's a very, very tough veteran. He's fought a lot of tough guys in the middleweight division. It's a huge step up in competition for Jordan Meehan, definitely. Even though like I said, he has been fighting guys like Josh Berkman and Cyborg and stuff like that. But man, you know, this is a big step up because Dan Miller, he's a guy that. You look at his resume, he's sure his wins aren't over the best fighters, but his losses are only to like literally like top 5, top 10 guys. So he's at 170 now. This is gonna be an interesting fight, but I do think that Jordan Meehan is gonna win the fight, and it's likely he'll get the decision because Miller's so tough. But don't be surprised if Jordan Meehan becomes the first man to stop Dan Miller with strikes, because the guy is just a beast. 23 years old. Watch out for this guy. He's gonna be something special, man.
Yeah, and you know those Miller boys, man. They'll stick in there with you. If you want to fight, they'll certainly help you find one. So if he's going in there to strike with somebody, Dan Miller will certainly oblige him. So yeah, that was the fight that I kind of was looking at because you know, I mean, obviously I don't know Jordan as well as you do, but kind of what I've seen, he looks like he's a game guy, and like you said, he's got this history of, you know, sometimes when you don't know someone as intimately as, like I said, you know Jordan, you don't see that what is about to happen. And I feel like you're giving us a good insight as to what Jordan is ready to do right now. And Dan Miller better damn well be ready for what Jordan's getting ready to do now, or he might just be like Forrest Petz and get you know, taken out in much the same way. But you know, like I said, those Miller boys are tough, and Dan will be ready, but he might be running into a freight train named Jordan. All right, so next up, I want to kind of go ahead and let's start wrapping things up here. We're going to go to our finished strongs, and I want to start with Adam, and I want to just, you know, listen, if you guys want to make money, then listen to the MMA Oddsbreaker podcast where Adam and the boys kind of break things down. That's the way. Last I checked, now I'm not sure if I listened to you guys the last podcast, but I was listening to one the other day. Are you not in the lead in terms of picking fights?
I think I still am. Luca Fury might have passed me at the last event because that was a tough card. The one in Japan. I mean, Wanderlei Silva. I didn't pick him. I picked Brian Stann to win that fight. I look like a dummy. Just joking. I think everyone picked him to win, but you know, I think I might be in first, man. I think my picking percentage right now is like 66%. So I'm picking up 2 or 3 fights correctly, which is pretty decent, I would say. You know, I want to go for 70%, but that's very difficult to do.
Okay, so that brings me to my question for your finish strong. Is this the card that you think you can get over 70%? What do you like? What do you like here betting wise? Just kind of abstract. Like I said, if they want to make some money, they need to listen to your podcast, but just point them in the right direction.
It's a tough card for betting, guys. I don't recommend betting too much on this card. Honestly, there's a few spots that I'll point out right now, but I would say in general, don't be a little choosy on this one because there's a lot of really, really close matchups. Anyways, as far as bets go, I haven't made my final bets because the betting lines for the preliminary card haven't come out yet, so I really can't comment too much on those fights because I haven't seen the lines yet. But as far as the main card goes, I like GSP. I think he's like minus 500. It's expensive, but I do think that he's worth throwing in a parlay with someone else that you like on the card, and you put them together and make some decent coin. I'm pretty sure he's going to win the fight. I mean, I guess there's a possibility that Diaz wins, but I don't know, man. And the co-main event, Johnny Hendricks, Carlos Condit. I think it's a pass unless you pick Condit, who's an underdog, and if you get some decent plus money on him, maybe he's worth a stab. But I would pass that one. Marquardt versus Ellenberger. I think Marquardt's like plus 150 right now, so I think he's worth a play. Honestly, I think the line's a little off. I think it should be closer to even, so I think he might be worth a stab. I also noticed that the inside the distance line on him is like plus 500 to get a finish in the fight, either by knockout or submission. So I think that's another line to look at. What's the other fight here? Ricci and Fletcher. Mike Ricci's like he's like a 3-1 favorite. I wouldn't touch the fight. He should win the fight. He should get the knockout, like I said, but it's possible that he could get out-grappled. I don't think it's worth laying your money on. And the one fight that I really do like for a bet here, and I will tell you guys, is Nick Ring against Chris Camozzi. Chris Camozzi opened as a pretty sizable underdog, but the public's been all over him, and now the line's down to a pick'em. So you get Nick Ring at about a pick'em price, and I really do like him for a bet in this fight because I think that he wins. The betting line is saying he wins about 50% of the time. I think Nick Ring wins the fight about 70 to 75% of the time. So I think it's a very good bet if you want to make it.
All right, TJ, you're up. Go ahead and finish strong.
All right, here it is. UFC fans, MMA fans, Diaz fans, it's time to throw all the shit away because this Saturday, it's not going to matter when these two guys step into the ring. And we're talking two of the top most talented fighters in the UFC are about to go head-to-head. And even, I've talked about this before, even with the blogs, the sites, Twitter, I mean, just people talking shit on both sides. Well, let's see what it is. I'm going to claim that this would be fight of the year. It could be very much the fight of the year. It could be one of the fights that we might remember 30 years down the road. This could be one of the greatest matchups that we've ever witnessed. Someone saying that, all the fans out there, let's throw the shit to the side. Let's actually watch this fight to see what it is, and we'll go from there. Because let the best man win. Because I think it's going to be, what did you call it? The brawl in Montreal. Because that's exactly what it's going to be.
And I just kind of want to say something real quick before I get to my finish strong about what TJ said. And, fans got to realize that whatever this fight ends up being, it's a fight for the ages. Just the matchup. I mean, these guys have earned that sort of a billing. So when you have a guy like Johnny Hendricks who comes out and says, I deserve this shot, if you deserve the shot, then keep winning. George St. Pierre got on his knees to get a title shot back in the day. So, he did what he had to do. He was crushing people, and he still had to beg for a title shot. So just do your business against Carlos Condit, and your time will come. But sit back and understand, Johnny Hendricks, that this is a fight. These guys have been doing some stuff for years now. Nick did his work in Strikeforce and Pride and some other organizations. George has obviously done his work in the UFC. But this is a fight that we've been waiting on forever. You don't get to see GSP and Nick Diaz fight every day. And we had to wait. This fight has been on and off again several times based on, Nick's legal troubles or just different things that have caused this fight to go back and forth. So enjoy that moment right before they tell them to get it on. Enjoy that moment where it's the build-up and it's about to, you don't get to see these every day. Now let me get to my finish strong. And not only is it going to be a finish strong, I'm going to pose a question to Adam about this because we talked to Jason Cruz about this. So I'm going to do my finish strong, and then I'm going to throw it over to Adam, and he can kind of make part of his finish strong commenting on it. Okay. Mark Hunt, Junior Dos Santos. I'm very interested in the fight. I think it's a very interesting matchup. People could say it's one-sided, but when you get hit like Hunt can, you're in every fight. What I want fans to do out there is to kind of have some perspective. I'm the biggest, I don't want to call myself a fanboy, but I'm in Dana White's pocket as much as anybody. I want the UFC to be successful, so if Dana sells me some snake oil, man, I'm buying it. So, but here's my thing that I want you guys to keep in mind. When Dana White tells you that someone didn't take a fight, you don't know why he didn't take that fight. And he's been doing it for years, and we've just kind of been accepting it like, oh, he didn't take the fight, he must be a pussy, or he doesn't want to fight the guy, or he's not ready. Well, we found out this week, and I'm sure this ain't the first week it's happened, that some guys aren't taking these fights because they're not comfortable with the number that's getting put in front of them to fight a guy. If you're Mark Hunt, man, you got to strike while the iron's hot. So it doesn't mean you're scared to fight Junior Dos Santos if Dana says you didn't take the fight, because he wants to gain a little, favor on social media by saying, I offered to fight to Mark Hunt. He didn't take it. If you're offering Mark Hunt got paid $6,000, I think, last fight. Now, he got the knockout of the night and all that. So at the end of the day, I think he made a lot more money. But to show, he got 6. To win, he got 6, and then 50 for the knockout of the night. So, I mean, if Dana White says, hey, your last fight you got paid 6, we're going to give you 10, and you're like, I'm fighting Junior Dos Santos, I'm not taking 10, and you hold out, because you don't want to take the fight at that number, then technically, yes, you're not taking the fight, but, not all the cards are on the table. So, Adam, let me get your thoughts on this in terms of, do you think this is the first time in the history of the UFC Dana White's ever represented someone who's not taking a fight when they just didn't like the number, or is this just our first exposure to it?
No, I think it happens all the time, to be honest with you. We just don't know about it. We never get to find out. Now, Mark Hunt actually hasn't said publicly that it was the money issue, but I think it's pretty obvious that, he didn't get the money, that he wasn't offered the amount of money that he feels he deserves to get to fight in a co-main event of one of the biggest cards of the year, the Memorial Day card, the heavyweight card. I heard that 6-6 number passed around the internet. I'm not sure if it's 100% accurate, but that is the number being passed around. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the number, because Mark Hunt actually, he had a contract with Pride, and the UFC offered him a buyout. And Mark Hunt said, "No, I want to fight in the UFC. I want to fulfill my contract, and I want to fight." So I doubt it was that much money. If they were willing to buy him out, it probably wasn't that much, because they would rather have him fight if it was a huge contract. Might as well get some bang for your buck. So I don't think he's making that much, and obviously he's not, because he's saying, or not saying, but he held out, and he probably wants to get a pay-per-view cut. Maybe that's what the thing was. I'm not sure. I don't even know if he got it, but I don't see why he wouldn't. Like I said, the heavyweight card, UFC 160, it's going to do big numbers. It's probably going to do 500,000 pay-per-view buys. Even if he gets, I don't even know. Let's see. If he gets a quarter for each pay-per-view buy, I'm not very good at math here, guys, but if $50,000 at like $50, maybe one of you guys could pull a calculator or something like that. But anyways, if just say he got a quarter for each one. Think about how much extra money that would be. It'd be a lot of money, like a lot of money. So I think that's maybe one of the things he was holding out for. Again, that's just that's just a guess for me. But there's no doubt in my mind that the guy is on a serious run right now. He's one of the top heavyweight fighters in the world. And you're right. He's trying to strike with the iron is hot. He's 38 years old. This is going to be the biggest fight of his career. And it very well could be the last big fight he's in, unless he wins. Because then I think if he wins, he's going to get that title shot, which would be pretty insane to think about. But
well, I'll pose 2 more questions to you. One, if you're Mark Hunt, do you take this fight for whatever money they're offering because of how important the fight is? And 2, do you think Dana White has a responsibility to tell us why people are declining fights?
No, I think you have to hold out, because, like I said, it's a huge fight. It's huge for his career, and it's a short notice fight as well, which is something to keep in mind. And as far as it's kind of short notice anyways, because he is an injury implicit. But yeah, as far as in the future, Dana saying about why guys are declining fights, I think that contract negotiations are going to stay private, probably for the most part, but there are going to be things like this that do slip out, and I think that Dana should be a little more honest about things. I remember with Tarek Safadine a couple weeks ago, Dana wrote on his Twitter or something, or he told someone that, he didn't take the fight against Carlos Condit, and then you have Tarek on the radio the next day saying, well, I'm injured right now, I can't take the fight against Carlos Condit, I'm not going to go and fight a guy like Carlos Condit with an injury. So I mean, I don't know how honest he is all the time, but like you said, John, I'm like you, man. I buy whatever Dana tells me. So if he says one thing, I tend to believe him, even if he's fibbing a little bit.
Yeah, and then we'll have to forgive him his trespasses, if you will, because that listen. I've said very candidly that I was a fan of the UFC when there was a realistic chance that they could be overtaken by Pride. And at the time, I was a UFC fan, and I didn't want to see that happen. So whatever Dana said, I trusted him, Lorenzo, the guys, and I was pulling for the UFC. So, that was my big concern at the time was, I'm going to trust Dana in what he wants to do. Obviously, he can't be give full disclosure. Just think of all the times I watched the interview with him earlier, and he was getting interviewed by this kind of I'll give the guy his props, the fight nerd. He was kind of this goofy kid. He actually asked some good questions, but Dana goes, Josh Barnett will never ever fight in the UFC, and this was like a year ago. And I mean, you know, and then you think about all the times Dana White has said something will never ever happen, and it does. You know, I appreciate that about him. I appreciate the fact that he's willing to keep an open mind and switch up things if he changes it. So so that's my stance on Dana. That's my stance on the UFC. It's a big weekend. One of the biggest weekends perhaps in the history of the UFC. It's the Brawl in Montreal. It's UFC 158. St. Pierre versus Diaz. I'm going to get some traction on that on Twitter, TJ. I'm going to hashtag the shit out of Brawl in Montreal. I'm going to do it. I'll make it happen. Okay, so I'd like to thank my guest this week. Now, the best place to find this man, one of the most prolific gentlemen in the future of mixed martial arts journalism, is to go directly to the Twitter handle that you see right there, mmaoddsbreaker. He's up to so many things that trying to track them all down, it would be an act of futility. You might as well just go to his Twitter and he'll let you know what's going down. Adam, thanks again for your time. It's been a blast as always. We'd like to talk to you after the card and get your thoughts on a post-fight show because I know you're going to go cover it. So have fun and enjoy yourself while you're there and enjoy the fights.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I love doing the show with you guys. You guys are both very educated in the sport. So anytime you want me on, let me know.
Awesome. TJ, I'll sign off with you as I do always. Keep your hands up and your chin down. This is the Hot Cage Podcast.